We're excited for
Next week. Okay. Yeah, not me.
it's none of your business.
It wasn't. Both of you? Yeah. The big confidence for the organization.
It starts next week, this coming week. This month.
It's not. Oh, okay. It's not. Two by two. Two dimensions.
Well, whatever question we asked today, we can just bring them down.
Exactly. Make sure it's not. There you go. Jason. You did know city. Last night.
Jason?
Yeah.
He said he's fine.
I told him that you come because we were at the lab at 3 a.m. doing that project. I was like, yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
maybe he's watching virtually.
Yeah. That's what yes, that important posture is.
You said it's due today.
That's the 11th time. This was for a while.
Are you guys gonna work until 11 p.m.?
Well, I am going to my lab right after this. Probably, hopefully we'll finish it before then. I think we did finish our report last time. But we need to run through all the codes and the report and the annual version. Probably everyone right after she talked about. I think it's not all at once. It's great that we should be able to submit simulation. Our goal was to finish it last night. We're just trying to prepare it.
Yeah.
Well, we went to the for sure. So. You know,
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Center for Connected and Automated Transportation Research Review. My name is Calvin Tuttle. I'm the Communications Director for CCAT. We host these webinars as a way to highlight the cutting-edge research being led by our consortium members. I'm very excited for today's presentation led by our director, Dr. Henry Liu. Dr. Henry Liu is the Bruce D. Greenshields Collegiate Professor of Engineering and the Director of Mcity at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. He's a Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering, a Professor of Mechanical Engineering, and a Research Professor here at Umtree. Dr. Liu conducts interdisciplinary research at the interface of transportation engineering, automotive engineering, and artificial intelligence. He is recognized for his foundational work in cyber-physical transportation systems, particularly on the development of smart traffic signal systems with connected vehicles and testing and evaluation of autonomous vehicles. He has published more than 140 refereed journal articles. His work on safety validation of autonomous vehicles has been published in Nature and featured as a cover story. He's also appeared on a number of media outlets, including Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Science Daily, Tech Xplore, CNBC, WXYZ, and more for transportation innovations. Professor Liu is the managing editor of the Journal of Intelligent Transportation Systems and a board member of the ITS America and IEEE ITS Society. Before we get started, a few notes for the folks online. Questions can be asked anytime during the presentation by using the Q&A box on Zoom or live chat on YouTube. Henry, thanks for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Calvin. It's pleasure to be back to my own court and make a presentation on project. And this is also a topic I have a lot of passion, and I've been working on this topic for the last 20-some years also. For those students who come into my seminar, I make sure you pass my preliminary exam for your PhD study. For those do not, I will check online if they don't attend, so I will give them harder questions, okay? All right, so I'm gonna talk about traffic signal optimization. And everybody knows traffic signals. Everybody drive and you experience some delays at the signal. Sometimes you complain and So like to look at it in terms of how we can use new technology to make these traffic signal more efficient and works better for the average travelers. So I want to start with some very basic in terms of the traffic signal control. So if you look at to the left picture for a regular 4-leg intersection, you have, for vehicular traffic, you have 12 movements. So each leg you have left turns through and right turns. And so for 4-leg, you have 12 movement on that. And then for traffic signal, the basic is that because this movement has conflicts, for example, the north-west through movement versus the east, the north-south through movement versus the east-west through movement, they obviously in conflict with each other. So in order to do that, we schedule the movement sequentially. So in this way, we can avoid this movement. There's some caveat that, for example, left turn and through are also, for example, the opposing the through movement versus the left turn, they have conflict too. And so sometimes these movements are being protected, so-called protected. We give dedicated green time to it. And then if it's permissive, then you can go as long as you can find sufficient gap in the traffic flow. So that's the basics in terms of these traffic signal operation. We're trying to time these signals in a way that we can avoid all these conflicts. At the same time, we're trying to make it as efficient as possible. So these times of the traffic signal phases, we call signal timing plan in the traffic control area. So then if you look at to the right, that shows you the traffic lights. And in most of the cases in the US, these traffic signals actually running on so-called fixed time traffic signals, meaning they run signal timing plan according to time of day. In this case, usually for these traffic signals, they at least have 4 signal timing plans. They have morning peak hour, middle of the day, afternoon peak hour, and then off peak. So at least you have 4 signal timing plans usually for these traffic lights. And then for some of the intersections, they also have detectors. And I show you in this picture, I show you a fully actuated traffic signal. In each lane, most for the through lanes, they usually have 2 detectors. They have a detector at the stop bar detecting the presence of a vehicle arrival. So if there's a vehicle stop over there, then we should somehow allocate green time for that vehicle go in the sequence. And then also once to the intersection, upstream the intersection, you will see there's detector called a once detector, or sometimes they call extension detector, meaning if you have more vehicles coming, supposedly we can give you more green time with a maximum in it. Okay. And then for the left turns, again, it's a presence detector. It's usually a little longer so that we make sure those vehicles stop at the left turn bay will be able to actuate the traffic light so that in the sequence, they will allocate green time to let them depart from the intersection. So in the field, there are various variations related with the setup. For most of the cases, if you have a major approach and you have a minor approach, then you don't need all these detectors. Sometimes you only need, for the major approach, you only need extension detectors because you can assume there's always cars to arrive at the intersection. For the minor approach, you usually have only the stop bar detectors because you don't have a lot more extensions. And so there are variations in terms of detectors. Okay, and so these are more, I would say, more efficient in terms of how we control these intersections. However, we don't have a lot of these traffic signals. So in terms of the overall, I would say the number of traffic lights in the U.S. There's estimate in terms of there's various numbers. But the latest estimate in terms of the traffic light is 320,000 traffic signals in the US. It's roughly about, on average, 1,000 people own a traffic signal in the US. And I would say majority of these, more than 50% of these are so-called fixed time traffic signals. And there's 30–40% of these are so-called vehicle actuated. By the way, those detectors could be the detectors buried underneath the road. It could be video cameras. It could be these wireless detectors as well. So there's all sorts of detectors installed, location specific to the intersection. And so how we manage these detectors and how we manage the traffic signal timing plan is a very important task for any of the traffic management agency. We look at, City of Ann Arbor, Oakland County, Road Commission, and every county, every city has these traffic management agencies. They're trying to maintain these detectors if they have vehicle actuated signals, or they maintain these traffic signal timing plan to make it up to date according to the traffic flow. Okay. Well, in the practice, for most cases, for these traffic signals, we retime the traffic signal in terms of signal timing plan every about 3 to 5 years. The reason is the reason mostly is cost, is because every traffic signal, in order for us to retime it, we have to collect data, and then we have to put it into the optimization model to get a signal timing plan, and we have to implement those, and then we have to verify those. And so the whole procedure take a few weeks, and then for each traffic signal right now in Michigan is roughly about $5,500 US. And you can think of if we have 300,000 traffic light, and then at just one time, these traffic signal, one time for these traffic lights, it takes a lot of money. So that's why we don't really do it that often. And every 3 to 5 years, we don't only do it once. And so a lot of these traffic lights, we usually don't touch it for 10, 20 years for these fixed time signals. And the bottleneck for us not to keep these traffic signal timing plan up to date is data. Is difficulty to collect data, and the data also is the most costly portion of the signal retiming. And so I've been working on this. The other thing I want to mention is there's this National Traffic Signal Report Card shows the overall in terms of, in the US, in terms of our traffic signal grid, it's about C+ in 2019. So it's, as a professor, we know it's not a very good grade. We want to be A, not C, but that's where we are right now. And so I've been working on the traffic signal retiming and optimization and data collection for the last 20 years also. And I want to show you really the work I did 20 years back when I was still a professor at the University of Minnesota. And this is the, in 2005, we started to develop really a data collection box. And so if you look at to the left, that's the traffic controller cabinet if you open it up. And this box is the controller. And what happens usually at the intersections is there's no data is being collected whatsoever. And so it's, those controller control the traffic light, there's detector being actuated, extend the traffic light, and that's it. And there's no data being collected. And so what we did in 2005 is we developed a box ourselves. That small black box is our box. And that's essentially an event recorder. We're just trying to record every event happened at the intersection. The event I define as every vehicle detector actuation, every vehicle detector deactuation when they leave the detector. And those are all events. Every signal phase change, for example, the green light change to yellow light. Every these changes will be an event. Pedestrian push the button, that's an event at the intersection. So if you think of these just like an airplane black box, listen to what's happening. It doesn't really interfere whatsoever in terms of the traffic light. It just record everything happened at the intersection. Well, that data is actually very powerful, and we were the first in the world to collect such data in 2005. And we implement those in city of Minneapolis area, the Twin Cities area, and then this is Trunk Highway 55. We have box in each intersection. And then we use these, what we call high resolution event-based data to derive in terms of the traffic state, in terms of how long the queue was, and then what will be the travel time from one intersection to other intersection so that we can estimate the trajectory of these passing through traffic. And so we can also look at in terms of, does this lead to oversaturation? Do they have spillover and things like that? And with that information, we were able to optimize the traffic signal parameters, giving a better signal timing plan. And at the time, we still use these, dedicated box to collect these high resolution data. Nowadays, almost every modern traffic signal controller, from Econolite, from Siemens, all of these traffic signal controllers are having this functionality already. So we don't need to have dedicated box to collect this data. Well, after I came to Michigan, I started to work on connected vehicles. And at the time, Umtree is working on safety pilot model deployment project. And there's 20-some intersections being instrumented with roadside unit. There's 2850 vehicles being instrumented with onboard unit as well. And so that the vehicles will be able to communicate with the intersections through the communication device. At the time, it's still DRSRC-based dedicated short-range communication. And so that when the vehicle approaches to the intersection, the vehicle, broadcasting their basic safety message related to their position and speed and things like that. And those messages will be received by the roadside unit. So the roadside unit has every vehicle's trajectory approaching to the intersection for those connected vehicles, right? So not every vehicles, because we only have like 2850 vehicles in the Ann Arbor area equipped with the OBUs. Okay, and so with that, however, then we start to look at how we can utilize these near intersection trajectories, vehicle trajectory. Can we utilize that to help us to manage these traffic light better? And so this is Plymouth and Green intersection that many of you are very familiar with, it's not far from here. And let's just look at in terms of this phase 2, which is the main through phase from west to the east in the afternoon. So this is 3 to 6 p.m. in the afternoon. So the traffic flow is, a lot of people leaving city of Ann Arbor going to home, right? And so and just look at in terms of the vehicle arrivals at this intersection. And as I mentioned, we know the trajectory when they come to the intersection within the communication range. We know these connected vehicle trajectories. And so all of these are vehicle trajectory. And then at the time, this is in 2016. And so at the time, these traffic lights are adaptive. They work on a real-time adaptive, react to traffic flow. And then so they are, the start time of the green and the end time of the green is not fixed. They're moving. And so depending upon the traffic situations, so the start and the duration of the green time is not the same from cycle to cycle. But once we put the green time all together, because we collect about 2 weeks of data and put all these trajectories together. So this is where green start. And then these are the vehicle arrivals. Just look at how many vehicles arrive relatively to the green start, to the intersection. And so then you get the so-called histogram, right? So the arrival histogram to the intersection. Then we look at it in terms of, okay, look at when the green start and look at the percentage of the vehicle arrive at the intersection without stop, okay? And so this is just, for example, this blue line get to the intersection and then without any stop, cross the intersection without stop. For that, we call arrival on green. And because this is phase 2, major through movement phase in the afternoon, supposedly this movement has priority. So we should favor this movement, give this movement priority so that they get coordination. Okay. And as a traffic engineer, this might be a question I'll ask you. Usually for the major movement, the arrival on green should be better than 50% because you favor this movement and you should give longer green time to this movement to provide coordination as well. And however, at the time, this phase 2 green time is about 25%. So we know it's not really working that well for whatever reason. And so that was our first study. With that, it gave us the indication, the intuition that these vehicle trajectory data near the intersection can help us to diagnose in terms of what's happening at the intersection. At least we can identify what's wrong with it. And if we can identify what's wrong with it, then we can do a better job in terms of provide a signal timing plan to manage it better. So this is the picture I used for the last 10 years also. This really tells us this thing can give us indication in terms of traffic signal performance, can help us to optimize signal. So if you didn't really learn anything from this talk, that's probably the key message I'm telling you. Okay, so now if you look at it in terms of the traditional detector data, I told you I work on the detector data collection when I was in Minnesota, and then after I came here, look at the trajectory data. Each of these has distinct advantage and disadvantages. So if you look at the detector data, so they buried either underneath of the road, I have your camera, look at that direction. Every vehicle passed by, I can capture those. However, I can only capture that specific location, right? So for example, if I have a really, really long queue and your detector is here, I can't capture those. So it's difficult for us to use that information to manage these intersections. Well, trajectory data, on the other hand, is almost everywhere. You know, there's vehicles, if we can look at the trajectories they provide, we can see that these trajectory has very rich information. You know, they approach the intersection, they stopped at 100 feet to the stop bar, and then stop for like 30 seconds, and then they leave. All this information is associated with the trajectory. So for each individual vehicle, it provides you very rich information. However, it's not specific to a location. And we only have a few % of these vehicles, these connected vehicles. It's not every vehicle is connected yet. Okay, so those are the differences. So each of these has advantages and disadvantages. The good news to these vehicle trajectory data is we no longer need to maintain the infrastructure. For example, the connected vehicle data, the trajectories, could come from various forms, could come from Google Map, right? So you use Google Map, you essentially give your trajectories. And there's if you use OnStar, GM's OnStar, that essentially you have trajectories available. Okay, so it could come from various forms. It doesn't have to be location specific. And the agencies they don't have to maintain these detectors or infrastructure whatsoever because data doesn't really come from them. Okay, and so then we look at it in terms of how we, change our paradigm in terms of how we manage the traffic flow. Okay, in the traditional paradigm, we either use the detector data or we get the counts. Sometime when I was young, when I was a graduate student, I still used the counters to get the count myself. And so those are the things you have to do to retime the traffic light. And then from that, you can estimate in terms of speed, density, these traffic flow parameters, you get the counts volume, and then you put that into a simple traffic flow model. And then you can utilize traffic flow model to do optimization, and then you can implement that into the real world. And you have to sort of verify that also for your each time signal retiming. Well, with the proposed method, we're not gonna do this anymore. We're not gonna rely upon anything location specific at infrastructure. We only look at the connected vehicle trajectory data on the cloud. Okay, so the agency doesn't have to maintain that. Okay, so we get the trajectory data. And as I mentioned, each trajectory data has a lot of information, has delays, stops, and things like that. We aggregate to get that information. Now, we also then develop a new model connecting these traffic flow model together with the trajectories. And we have that once we have that model, then we can utilize that new traffic flow model together with optimization algorithm to optimize traffic signal timing plan. And then we can implement that into the field, and then that loops run again. Okay, so that's the new paradigm versus the old paradigm working, really rely upon detector data. And by the way, detector data in like northern country like Michigan is quite hard to maintain. You know, during the winter time, if you have loop detectors underneath of the road, the snow plows sometimes damage that detector. And so that's also why, although there are real-time adaptive signals in City of Ann Arbor, actually City of Ann Arbor runs Scoot, Siemens Scoot system as real-time traffic signal control. It sometimes doesn't really work that well because the detector was, failed. And so that's why we also want to separate the data collection versus the signal control. Okay, so in our new paradigm, we rely upon these vehicle trajectory data is on the cloud. It's not really collected by the traffic flow agencies. But we can utilize that data to help traffic management agency to optimize their traffic signal. And so the difficulty on that is that, okay, we only have a few percent. We do not have a lot. We have a few percent, and then we want to leverage this a few percent to do a better job to manage traffic signal. And then also in the traffic flow theory, we don't have the traffic flow model that work directly with trajectory data. All the traffic flow models work perfectly with volume density and speed data, but they do not have connections directly to the vehicle trajectories. So we have to come up with a new model. Okay, so my early try on the new model, this is 2014, 2016 is, okay, if we want to utilize these vehicle trajectory data for signal optimization, the instinct for us is that can we use just a few percent of the data to recover in terms of the traffic volume? Because the traditional optimization algorithm rely upon volume data. And so this is our first try. This is initially what we look at is, okay, now if you look at it in terms of vehicle trajectories, we know a few, we don't know a lot. But if a vehicle stops 100 feet from the intersection, I know roughly four vehicles in front of this vehicle because the stopping distance between vehicles are roughly about 20 feet per vehicle. So we know like 4 vehicles in front of that stopping vehicle. So that's volume information. Okay, if the vehicle passing by without a stop, I know the maximum queue has not reached that point yet. So all of these are information related to volume. Now with that, then we can really estimate in terms of the volume and through this mathematical equations. So basically, let's just assume there's a random arrival, it's a Poisson arrival, time-dependent Poisson arrival. And we know there's only a few percent of these, which lambda here is the penetration rate, and P here is the arrival probability. Okay, and then we observe a bunch of vehicles arrive at the intersection. Some of the vehicles arrived at the intersection, stopped, and some of the vehicles passing through the intersection. Okay, so with that, we can write down in terms of the likelihood of the observation. For each vehicle arrive at the intersection, we can write down the likelihood function. And then we can use maximization of the likelihood to estimate in terms of the penetration rate. And with the estimated penetration rate, we'll be able to estimate in terms of traffic volume. And that was actually my first student graduated from University of Michigan. That was his dissertation. And so that was in 2016. And this also being tested in that Green and Plymouth intersection. I have students go there taking videos, and then we count manually and compare with in terms of what we estimate from the safety pilot vehicle trajectory data. It works really well. And that's why we start to look at is how we can utilize this algorithm to optimize traffic signal. And eventually we actually licensed, so Keith is here, we licensed to this company called Didi in China. We use that algorithm to implement about 20 intersections also in China, 20 cities in China. And so that was so I spent 2 years there too. All right, after I came back, I want to implement that in the US, and then I want to do better than what I did for just volume estimation. Remember, we say we have two difficulties. One is low penetration rate. The other one is we do not have a model connecting vehicle trajectory data versus the traffic flow. Okay, and so we start to look at traffic flow model, because then this will give us greater capability to optimize traffic light. Okay, then we look at it in terms of the traditional traffic flow model, regardless whether it's the Eulerian coordinate or Lagrangian coordinate. So so-called Eulerian coordinate is basically looking at location specific. So you have X, you have Y, and locations. And then the Lagrangian coordinate is a moving coordinate. So it moves along with vehicle trajectories. And so for these two coordinate systems, it doesn't really change anything related with traffic flow phenomena, but the only thing is the representation of the parameters are different. And for each of these, it doesn't really have connections directly to the vehicle trajectory, and particularly to only a few % of the vehicle trajectory. And so that's why we started to look at our new model. So this new model is essentially a simplified traffic flow model, work only for near intersection cases. Well, we only concern with the intersection because we only, the focus here is traffic signal. And so what we do is essentially a simple point Q model. The so-called point Q model is that if you have a vehicle arrive at the intersection and stop at the intersection, you have one vehicle queued up at the intersection. If you have another vehicle arrive at the intersection and then stop at the intersection, there's another vehicle queued up. So the queue becomes 2. Another vehicle comes, queue becomes 3. And then if the vehicle green light, this queue leaves, the queue lines become 2. Okay, so point queue. There's no vertical distance. It's all vertically built up in terms of queue lines. That's a simplified traffic flow model. Well, we want to connect that with trajectory. You can see that if we only use the vertical queue, it doesn't really have any trajectory associated with it. So what we did is that we make another simplified assumption that every vehicle follows a very simple car following model called Newell's car following model. And so that those students need to remember those. Okay, now it's essentially free flow speed approaching to the intersection and stopped. And then, after a while, it goes free flow speed. And so that's Newell's simplified car following model with, the distance between the vehicle adjusted by the speed. All right, so then we utilize this Newell model. We call it, in this situation, we call it Newell coordinate, meaning our coordinate no longer is vertical. It actually go along with vehicle trajectories. So in this way, we can directly connect the trajectory together with the point Q. So under the new coordinate system, it's much easier for us to represent in terms of what's happening in the traffic flow. And we can connect in terms of trajectory together with the stochastic queuing model. Okay, and so very easily you can capture in terms of, okay, my arrival is A, and then my departure is B, then my Q length is X, is essentially X is equivalent to the current Q plus the arrival minus the departure. That's all. So it's very simple. And then with that, then you can calculate in terms of your Q length, right? So for this case, at the moment, for time 2 at the moment, your Q length is 2. All right, so with that, then you can make assumptions now. Make assumptions that say if your arrival probability is this A following, let's say, Bernoulli distribution, then you can calculate, okay, a departure, I know the traffic light, and if it's green, you have deterministic departure. Okay, now you have probabilistic arrival, you have a deterministic departure, and you can, starting from the 0, you can calculate your essentially your point Q length probabilistically. Okay, and so that's what we do in terms of our Q length distribution. You can calculate your distribution of the Q length. Okay, now with that, you can calculate in terms of every trajectory, every segment in the time space diagram, every segment, you can calculate the probability now. So that's how we connect in terms of our queuing model with the vehicle trajectories. Now with that, then I can also connect with what we observe. So we only observe a few vehicles, a few % of the vehicles. Let's assume that you can calculate the Q length distribution. And your arrival here, probability, let's say at the times 3, your probability of arrival, let's say somehow you calculate is 0.4. Then you have a few, realizations right now. Then if there's no, could be this probability is 0.4, could be no trajectory at all. Then you have a probability. If it's trajectory arrived at the intersection, and then the Q length is 0.2, then you can calculate. The Q length is 0, meaning they can pass through the intersection. You can calculate that probability too. And if the Q length is 1, you can calculate that probability. Q length is 2, you can also calculate that probability, right? So then you can calculate all these probabilities together with your observed vehicle trajectories. Okay? And so that's how we connect the few % of the vehicle trajectory together with the queuing model. Now then you can estimate in terms of, okay, from that I can estimate the the penetration rate, because then I can also look at in terms of when these vehicles depart from the intersection. I can match those. And then I can estimate in terms of the penetration rate. And I can also estimate in terms of what will be my variance in terms of my estimation. Okay, and so with the variance, I can look at how much data is sufficient for me to make a confident estimation of that volume or Q length. And so again, that's a more recent dissertation. Dr. Xingmin Wang, that's his dissertation. Okay, and so with these models and also with these vehicle trajectory data, now we have everything we have in that loop. So we can apply this into the real world situation. So the situation we apply to is city of Birmingham, in part of Oakland County, and we work together with General Motors with their vehicle trajectory data. And so on your right-hand side, all these dots are GM vehicles. And then it shows red color when it's had stops, and green color when that vehicle is moving. Okay, and so this city has total 34 intersections as a whole. And again, we do not need to rely upon anything from the data is not from the city. The city only provide us all of their signal timing plan. And by the way, city of Birmingham is a rich city. Somehow the city is all fixed time. So there's no detector whatsoever. So it's actually perfect testing ground for us. Okay, and so we have vehicle trajectory data. All of these signal timing plans available to us. And we do not need anything else from the city. Now we start to look at in terms of, okay, with this data, how we can diagnose which intersection have problem and how we're going to optimize those. And the way we sort of process this data is to put these, each vehicle trajectory arrive at an intersection. We have to align these data together for each intersection when they arrive. And so the next cycle put together on the first cycle, and then so that for each cycle, I know, a lot of trajectories. Although within each cycle, I only know a few, but if I put all of these data together from multiple days, then I have lots of data. Okay, so that's how we get this. So those are the arrival histograms at the intersection. And so I have these arrival histogram so that you can see that this is the arrival time, this is the departure time, right? So I know the arrival probability, and I also know the departure, at what time departure, and so I know the delay, right? So I can calculate this delay. Now, given the arrival, given the departure, remember I can use the simple point Q model we developed as part of under the New Valley coordinate. We can also calculate in terms of theoretically how much delay it is. Okay, and so with that, we have observation, we have theoretical estimation with a penetration rate. Then we can estimate in terms of how many % of the data we are available, the vehicle trajectory data is available. So it's very easily for us to derive in a point estimate in terms of the penetration rate. As I mentioned, we can also estimate in terms of the confidence interval. So for our estimation of the volume and the Q length, we can also give you in terms of what would be our confidence interval. And if you want to have higher confidence interval, then you need to accumulate more days of data. Okay, so that's, you can see that this is our point estimate, and then that's the shadowed area is essentially our confidence interval associated with that point estimate. Okay, so we have the model, we have the trajectory data. Now we can look at it in terms of how we utilize that to help us to optimize signal parameters. And so this is the case that for this intersection with these trajectories, then we can calibrate the model. You can see we can reflect in terms of what's happening in the real world with calibrated model. Now we can adjust in terms of signal parameters, right? So we have a model, we can predict what's going to happen. Now we can adjust the signal parameters. For example, we can adjust the offset of the signal and can see whether the delay getting better or not. If it's getting better, then should we further adjust or not? Okay. Now we have the data, we have the model, we have the optimization algorithm. We can calculate it in terms of signal parameters. Now we want to implement that into the field. Okay, and so this is an experiment we did in the almost exactly two years ago, in March of 2022 and April of 2022. So you can see we take 3 weeks of data before, and then we got that data, we calculate, optimize signal timing plan, we implement, and we observe for 3 weeks also. Okay. And so this is the before and after. And so this is the different directions. So you can see that this is before, and you can see the vehicle arrivals, there's multiple delays at the intersection. And you can see after the optimization, you can see the number of stops greatly reduced. Same thing for the other direction too. Okay, and particularly for major arterials, you might want to favor one approach, and then you want to just the other approach is not too bad for the peak hours. Okay, so this gave us the tools to adjust and then to optimize these signals. And the other good news related with vehicle trajectory data is that because the data is always being accumulated, it's on GM's cloud, it's always available. And so you don't have to optimize just one time, just do one-time optimization as a traditional signal timing approach. You can actually make a little bit different, make a little bit adjustment, and then readjust in a few weeks because there's data available. You don't really rely upon infrastructure to collect the data. So now you don't have to do 3 to 5 years optimization. You can do 3 weeks of optimization if you want. All right, so then we put together in terms of this system we call OSIS, optimizing signal as a service. Now, this is a service to traffic management agencies because we have, data coming from the cloud. And then we can collect the data, we can estimate the state, we can optimize signals, implement, and then collect the data again because there's data always being collected from the OEMs. Okay, so that's our implementation in the city of Birmingham. One of the good news with this implementation is the agency did not really receive any complaints. Sometimes if you do signal retiming, you did not really do a good job, then there's always complaints to your effort. And when we implement, everything settled, everything looks fine, and nobody complained our changes to signal timing plan. And that was a big success, by the way. And so the agencies has been really happy with us. Okay, so the next step, we just recently being awarded a SMART grant from US DOT. And so this is, again, it's the partnership between Road Commission of Oakland County, University of Michigan, and General Motors. And so we have about $1.5 million to implement this in a larger area and with more real-time operation of the traffic signals. So now, previously, we only did fixed time, offline optimization. Now we want to connect to their traffic control system and do real time. And I can present back to you next time how we do real time. And it's another interesting study we are developing. And so, by in terms of how conclusion, so we look at it in terms of what we did with traffic signal optimization and collecting high resolution data previously, now utilizing vehicle trajectory data and overcome some of the challenges, just utilizing low penetration rate vehicle trajectory data. And then we develop a model to connect vehicle trajectory together with the queuing model at the intersection. And then we were able to optimize traffic signal parameters. And we're hoping to further develop the algorithm so that we can control the traffic signals in real time, not offline. So I want to acknowledge in terms of the support from my group, from the students and the researchers in the group, General Motors providing the data, and also Road Commission of Oakland County for providing the support, the testing intersections and working with us, getting the signal timing plan and implemented, and all of that. It's to the large extent, it's their effort to make this possible. And so the last thing I want to mention is that if you do have interest to look into the details of the algorithm, there's 2 papers. One of the paper in the early days in 2017, a few years back, and that's the first paper in terms of volume estimation, and then the latest paper on the traffic flow model and signal optimization and the Birmingham implementation. So with that, I want to thank you very much for your attendance to the seminar, and then I will welcome questions from you.
Thank you, Dr. Wheeler. There's some time for questions, so I'll start with the folks in the room. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, when you do all this magic, are you generating signal timing plans?
Yep.
So that's one of the outputs.
Yeah, that's the output. Yeah, that's exactly the output. So we have signal timing plan being generated. For the current implementation, we give the signal timing plan to the traffic management agency. They implement.
And when you see, have you thought about using something other than GM vehicles for the path? You could use basic safety message on all these vehicles, right?
The current GM vehicles, the trajectory data is coming from their OnStar system. So there's no basic safety message. There's no connected, there's no dedicated short range communication. Yeah. So we get just the trajectory coming. I have to say, one of the things for us to do a better job is to have higher percentage of the vehicles which are connected. And so with GM vehicle in the Oakland County implementation, we have our estimate is roughly about 6% or 7% of the vehicles which we have trajectory. And our earlier study, about 10 years ago, is that if we can get like 15 to 20% of vehicle trajectory data, we don't even need the model. We can just directly derive everything we need. And so it will be even much more powerful, much more real-time operation. And so now at the moment, we have to, rely upon, really look at, if we don't have sufficient data, we have to accumulate longer time. But if we have 15, 20%, I think we can do a much better job. So I have been advocating to the multiple OEMs that if you can put the data together, everyone benefit. We can do a better job.
Do your next phase, are you doing Woodward and
So for the smart, it's not going to be in Birmingham. I think this will be a larger area. And no, it's still is still within Oakland County. Yeah.
Other questions in the room?
First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. So I have a quick question about pedestrian implications. So many of these traffic intersections have corresponding pedestrian crosswalk light. So you may be aware how might this optimization scheme affect pedestrian traffic? Yeah, I guess pedestrian traffic flow. So.
That's not really impact pedestrian time. Pedestrian for traffic signal optimization, most of the cases constraints. Okay, so for example, for this geometry of the intersection, you need to provide at least this much of walk time, and because based upon certain estimate of the walking speed. So those are constrained. It will be part of your optimization. So you're just adding that constraint to your optimization. Yeah, and then the other thing I want to say is this signal optimization mostly focusing on I would say the vehicular traffic, right? So if it happens that your pedestrian pattern become change greatly, let's say you have a new shopping mall, and now you have a lot of pedestrians, your pedestrian traffic flow increase. You can't really just rely on vehicle trajectory data. You have to get pedestrian count and then provide the constraint to this program.
This is tremendous work. Thank you. Maybe you mentioned that I didn't get it. I wonder whether you are using those algorithms to optimize each signal independently, or you actually collectively looking at as a whole in a certain area. So that.
Yeah. That's a great question. So what we did is we usually divided the area into zones. And so, for example, the arterials, a stretch of arterial become one zone, and those intersections will be optimized together because we need to optimize in terms of signal coordination. And so some of the intersection might be isolated, and then so we just optimize these intersections independently. And so we have not really to do optimization as an area. we have not do that yet, but there are a lot of work on those, a lot of research work on those, but very difficult to to optimize as an area. So we usually divide it into arterials versus intersections.
Any other questions in the room?
Thanks for the.
All right, you pass your preliminary exam.
I think this method would be especially helpful in the intersections without detectors, but I have a little, I'm curious about intersections with the detector. How they can get advantage from this method. In my short thoughts, like having detectors would still help in like adaptive way of like, they could do adaptive signal timing, but how do you think this method can help with intersections with it? I think like it can capture broken detectors or like capture several things that traditional way of detectors cannot capture well.
Yeah, that's a great question. As I mentioned, the detector data versus trajectory data, each has advantage and disadvantage. I'll give you one example. The detector will be particularly advantageous is that for minor approach, and then if you only rely upon the few % of the vehicle trajectories, you really don't know like in real time what's the traffic flow coming in, right? Because you haven't really observed anything. But if you have a detector data, if there's just one vehicle, now you can actuate, that detector can be actuated. You have a traffic, you have a vehicle stop over there. You need to give green light, within the cycle, and so that you can release that vehicle quicker. So you don't have to wait until the next cycle to release the vehicle. So sometime if you stop at particularly at night, you stop at that light and you see everything is there's no vehicle, but you still have a red light. That's because you don't have a detector, and so the detector will work really well in this type of situation. But for these, if it's for during the peak hours for congested situation, this will be a lot more effective. And so each of these has their advantage or disadvantage, but if your concern is really on congestion during peak hours, this will give you better performance because detector is specific, you don't really capture that congestion. So.
Any other questions in there? Okay, we have some online. So signal retiming is complex, so I greatly appreciate this method of expediting evaluation. However, there's another complexity that involves updating the timing permit and implementing the timing changing in the controller, especially with municipalities with a large number of signals. Have you considered if that is possible, or is this solution envisioned to be an evaluation solution only and not edging into adaptive systems?
We have not really looked at either a warrant or picture or permit or something like that. With in this study, we always assume a traffic light is it's being installed, and so whether this is what in terms of the warrant situation or permit situation, we not really consider those. We're assuming those are available to us already, and we just look at it in terms of how we can get the cloud data help us to optimize these parameters.
All right, thank you, Dr. Liu. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So I just want to thank Dr. Liu for his time. If you're interested in learning more about our research projects, you can go to the CCAT website. If you missed any part of today's presentation, it will be uploaded to the CCAT YouTube channel on Tuesday, May 7th. Please be sure to subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications. Before we close, I'm pleased to announce the plenary session during the 7th Annual CCAT Global Symposium on Mobility Innovation presented by Mcity and Umtree. Dr. Henry Liu will lead a panel on AV safety testing and consumer acceptance. He's joined by Professor Bogdan Ipurinu, Roger L. McCarthy Professor of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Michigan and the Director of the Automotive Research Center, Todd Frankowiak, Vice President of Safety at CAVNU, Stephen Lesh, Vice President of Hardware Operations at Aurora, and Kathleen Rizik, Senior Director of User Experience, Benchmarking, and Technology at JD Power. In-person virtual registrations are still available, so make sure you secure your space by clicking the link in the chat box or scanning that QR code on the screen. Thanks, everyone.